The heavy cruiser's stalwart shield drifted silently through the star-speckled void near the tattered rim, its massive hull bristling with weapon arrays that reflected the distant starlight. Captain Vorel stood on the command bridge, his scaled hands clasped behind his back as he gazed at the tactical display. The Kthar commander's yellow eyes narrowed as he studied the sensor readings from the disputed sector. Intelligence had reported Centauri expansion in this region, but the scale of their movements suggested something far more aggressive than mere colonial endeavors. Status report. Vorel rumbled, his reptilian voice carrying the natural authority that had served him well through decades of command. Commander Trell responded immediately, the Xylosian's movements precise and economical as his fingers danced across the holographic interface. All systems nominal, Captain. Long-range sensors detect no immediate threats, but we are receiving disturbing communications from outposts along the rim. Centauri vessels have been spotted in increasing numbers. Vorel nodded, unsurprised but concerned. The Centauri were not a species that understood subtlety or patience. Half mechanical, half biological, they operated with cold logic and ruthless efficiency, viewing purely biological species as inherently inferior and inefficient. Their expansion had been relentless over the past decade, consuming resource-rich systems and either assimilating or eliminating the native populations. What made them particularly dangerous was their absolute refusal to negotiate or communicate with what they termed primitive organics. "And now our guest?" Vorel asked, unable to keep a note of skepticism from his voice. Trell's expression remained neutral, but Vorel detected the slight tightening around his subordinate's eyes that betrayed his feelings. Dr. Alara Vance is in her assigned quarters, studying the cultural database as she has been since her arrival. Vorel suppressed a sigh. The human woman had arrived 3 standard days ago, designated by Alliance Command as a diplomatic observer. The very title seemed absurd, given the Centauri's well-documented refusal to engage in any form of diplomacy. She had been quiet, polite, and utterly unremarkable, constantly taking notes, requesting access to historical records, and observing bridge operations with those attentive human eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Humans were still relatively new to the Galactic Alliance, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 2 centuries ago, but they had quickly established themselves as adaptable and resourceful allies. Still, sending an anthropologist and linguist to observe interactions with a species that never spoke seemed like a waste of valuable space aboard a military vessel. "Captain, we're detecting multiple warp signatures." The sensor officer's voice cut through Vorel's thoughts. "Configuration matches Centauri battle group patterns." Vorel straightened, instantly alert. "Numbers and composition?" "Sir, this can't be right." The officer's voice faltered. "Sensors indicate at least 30 vessels, including 3 dreadnoughts. That's nearly a fifth of their known fleet strength." A cold silence fell over the bridge. The stalwart shield was a formidable vessel, but against such overwhelming force, its chances were slim. "Alert all hands. Battle stations. Contact nearby Alliance outposts and request immediate reinforcement." Vorel's orders were calm and measured, betraying none of the concern he felt. "Deploy countermeasures and ready all weapon systems." As the bridge erupted into disciplined activity, the turbolift doors slid open. Dr. Alara Vance stepped onto the bridge, datapad in hand. She was of average height for a human, with dark hair pulled back in a practical style, her expression thoughtful but calm. Nothing about her suggested panic or even particular concern about the sudden flurry of activity. "Captain," she acknowledged with a respectful nod. "I assume we've encountered the Centauri?" "Dr. Vance, this is not the time," Commander Trell interjected before Vorel could respond. "We are preparing for possible hostile engagement. Please return to your quarters immediately." Vance didn't move. "Captain, may I have permission to access the communication systems and historical databanks on AI conflicts and extremist logical entities?" Vorel stared at her, momentarily bewildered by the absurdity of the request in the face of imminent combat. "Doctor, We are about to face a Centauri battle group of unprecedented size. What possible relevance could historical data have at this moment? Comparative research, she replied simply, as if the answer were obvious. The Centauri are logic-driven entities with certain parallels to various technological and ideological systems humanity has encountered or created. I believe there may be useful patterns to analyze. Before Vorel could dismiss the request, the tactical officer called out, "Captain, the Centauri vessels have taken formation. They're surrounding us and the nearest outposts. Standard encirclement pattern." Vorel made a quick decision. "Very well, Doctor. You may access the communication subroutines and historical archives, but stay out of the way of my crew." In truth, he saw no harm in letting the human occupy herself with academic pursuits in what might be their final hours. "Thank you, Captain," Vance said with a slight smile, moving to an unused auxiliary station at the edge of the bridge. She immediately began accessing files with surprising speed and familiarity with the Alliance systems. "Sir, Centauri vessels are powering weapons systems," reported the tactical officer. "They're launching precision strikes against our outer defense systems." "Return fire, defensive pattern Sigma," Vorel ordered. "Open communication channels on all standard frequencies." "Channels open, sir." No response from the Centauri. Of course not, Vorel thought grimly. The Centauri never responded. They simply attacked, methodically and relentlessly, until their opponents were destroyed or subjugated. As the first volley of energy weapons struck the stalwart shields, causing the entire vessel to shudder, Vorel noted with detached curiosity that Dr. Vance remained focused on her terminal, seemingly oblivious to the battle unfolding around her. Her fingers moved rapidly across the interface, pulling up file after file in sequences that seemed random and disconnected. The battle continued for nearly an hour, with the stalwart shield absorbing punishing damage while inflicting minimal harm on the numerically superior Centauri forces. Shield capacity was down to 30%, and several key systems were approaching critical failure. The nearby Alliance outposts were reporting similar situations, with some already going silent. Amidst the chaos, Vorel noticed Vance approaching him with determined steps. Her expression remained calm, almost detached, but there was a new intensity in her eyes. "Captain, I need to make a specific request," she said quietly, keeping her voice low enough that only he could hear. "I need access to deeper military archives, specifically Earth's declassified records of 21st century cyber warfare, mimetic warfare studies, and philosophical papers on logical paradoxes and self-referential systems." Vorel stared at her, momentarily distracted from the battle. "Doctor, this is hardly the time for academic research." "It's not academic," she replied, her voice taking on an edge he hadn't heard before. "It's tactical." Something in her tone gave him pause. Humans were known for their unconventional approaches to seemingly impossible situations. And in their current predicament, conventional tactics were clearly failing. "Very well," he conceded after a moment. "Commander Trell, grant Dr. Vance access to the requested archives." Trell looked up from his station, disbelief clear on his face. "Captain, with all due respect." "Do it," Vorel ordered firmly. "We have little to lose at this point." Trell complied, though his disapproval was evident. Vance returned to her station without another word, diving back into her research with renewed purpose. Over the next several hours, as the battle continued to rage with the stalwart shield taking increasingly serious damage, Vorel observed Vance's activities with growing curiosity and suspicion. She had requested and received access to a bewildering array of seemingly unrelated historical and theoretical materials. Studies on the collapse of algorithm-dependent financial markets from Earth's history. Documentation of early AI failures in complex ethical scenarios. Philosophical treatises on Gödel's incompleteness theorems and other paradoxes of pure logic. Historical analyses of supposedly invincible empires that collapsed due to internal contradictions or ideological failure. Even more puzzling, she had begun transmitting small packets of data on a narrowband, weakly encrypted channel, one that the Centauri could easily intercept and decode. The transmissions consisted of disconnected snippets, philosophical quotes, outdated code fragments, graphs showing the collapse of algorithm-based systems, and reports of AI failures in complex situations. When Commander Trell noticed these transmissions and confronted her, she had calmly described it as sharing basic cultural data. Dr. Vance, Trell had said, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration, the Centauri do not engage in cultural exchange. They do not negotiate. They do not communicate. They conquer or destroy. What exactly do you hope to accomplish? I'm not negotiating, she had replied with that same unsettling calm. I'm introducing variables. Now, as the stalwart shields faltered to below 20% capacity and multiple sections reported critical damage, Vorel was beginning to wonder if he had made a grave error in allowing the human such latitude. What if she was somehow collaborating with the enemy? It seemed impossible, given humanity's standing in the Alliance, but desperation could drive even the most loyal allies to seek survival through betrayal. He was about to order her access restricted when the tactical officer called out in confusion. "Captain, the Centauri vessels. They've ceased fire." "Confirmed," added the sensor officer. "All Centauri ships are maintaining position, but have powered down their main weapon systems." A tense silence fell over the bridge. The Centauri never ceased an attack until their objective was achieved. Never. "Are they experiencing technical difficulties?" Vorel asked, suspicion heavy in his voice. "Unknown, sir. Their systems appear to be functioning normally. They're just waiting." All eyes turned to Dr. Vance, who continued working at her terminal as if nothing unusual had happened. "Doctor," Vorel said, his voice dangerously quiet, "I believe you owe us an explanation." Vance looked up, her expression thoughtful but not surprised. "I've been sharing historical and theoretical examples of how purely logic-based systems can encounter singularities or self-destructive paradoxes when faced with non-logical elements or unpredictable data, such as human behavior or the complexity of biological universes." "And how is that relevant to our current situation?" Trell demanded. "The Centauri operate on pure logic. Their entire society, their decision-making processes, their very consciousness is built on logical frameworks. I suspected they might be vulnerable to the same weaknesses that plagued early artificial intelligences on Earth, an inability to process certain types of contradictory or self-referential information without triggering logical loops or reasoning failures." "You're suggesting," Vorel said slowly, "that you've somehow incapacitated a Centauri battle group with philosophy?" Before Vance could answer, the communications officer interrupted. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the Centauri flagship. It's a request for direct dialogue, sir." "Put it through," Vorel ordered, bracing himself. "Sir," the communications officer hesitated. "The message specifies they wish to communicate only with the biological entity identified as Observer Vance." Every eye on the bridge turned to the human woman, who nodded slightly, as if this development was not entirely unexpected. "Captain," she said quietly, "with your permission, I'd like to accept their request." Vorel studied her for a long moment. "I want to know exactly what you plan to say." "I plan to complete the logical argument I've begun," she replied. "I've shown them examples of how purely logical systems inevitably encounter fatal paradoxes when confronting biological unpredictability. Now I need to help them reach the final conclusion. The continued conflict with humanity, the embodiment of biological unpredictability, presents an unacceptable probability of existential harm to their core logical structures. You believe you can convince the Centauri to retreat using only words?" Trell asked incredulously. "Not just words," Vance corrected. "Logic." Their logic turned back upon itself. After a moment of consideration, Vorel nodded. "Very well. But the communication will take place here on the bridge, where we can monitor every word." The main view screen flickered to life, revealing the metallic, angular face of what appeared to be the Centauri Supreme Commander, or rather, an interface representing their collective consciousness. Its features were an unsettling blend of mechanical precision and vague biological resemblance, with glowing optical sensors that processed information without emotion. Entity Vance, the Centauri began, its synthesized voice devoid of inflection. We have analyzed your transmitted data fragments. Explain purpose. Vance stepped forward, her posture relaxed but attentive. I am providing contextual information about humanity and biological intelligences that may be relevant to your strategic calculations. Information fragments appear unrelated. Historical references, philosophical constructs, computational failures. Explain relevance. The relevance is in the pattern, Vance replied calmly. Throughout human history, purely logical systems have consistently failed when confronted with the inherent unpredictability and adaptability of biological intelligence. Your analysis is incomplete without this data. The Centauri was silent for a moment, optical sensors flickering as if processing. Elaborate. Vance nodded, looking more like a professor giving a lecture than a diplomat in a life-or-death negotiation. Humans, despite being physically weaker and technologically inferior at first contact with many species, have a long history of overcoming more powerful and logical systems through asymmetrical, non-logical means. She gestured to her datapad. Your strategic calculations are based on current military capabilities and logical projections. But humans specialize in developing and deploying what we might call conceptual weapons, ideas, misinformation, or logical paradoxes that can collapse or paralyze a purely logic-based system from within, exploiting the very dependence on logic that such a system relies upon. The Centauri remained silent, but its optical sensors intensified in brightness. The data I've shared shows not the current military capabilities of the Alliance, but humanity's potential and inevitable development of unconventional attack methods targeted at the core vulnerabilities of the Centauri, your reliance on logic and collective networking. With methodical precision, Vance presented a final logical analysis based on the historical and theoretical data she had shared. Continued conflict with a species like humanity, representing the non-logical adaptability of the biological universe, would lead to an unacceptably high probability of destruction or irreparable damage to the Centauri's core logical structure in the future, regardless of immediate military outcomes. Retreat is not cowardice, she concluded. It is the optimal logical action to preserve Centauri system integrity in the face of an existential threat based on concept. The Centauri Supreme Commander remained silent for several long moments, its optical sensors flickering rapidly as if processing enormous amounts of data. Finally, it spoke. Analysis complete. Conclusion. Continued conflict is illogical. Existential risk exceeds strategic benefit. Implementing full withdrawal from the region. The communication link terminated abruptly, leaving the bridge of the stalwart shield in stunned silence. Within minutes, the sensor officer reported, "Captain, the Centauri vessels are breaking formation. They're retreating, sir." The powerful Centauri fleet withdrew in orderly fashion, disappearing from Alliance space and leaving an astonished silence on the stalwart shield's command bridge. Captain Vorel turned to face Dr. Alara Vance, who was calmly closing her data windows, her expression as composed as that of a researcher completing a routine study. In that moment, he realized that Vance was not merely a diplomat or observer. She was the embodiment of humanity's most dangerous weapon, the ability to understand, analyze, and weaponize their own history, philosophy, and psychology against any enemy, exploiting their deepest weaknesses without firing a shot. "Dr. Vance," Vorel said carefully, "what exactly was your mission here?" She looked up, her expression thoughtful. "Officially? To observe and document Centauri behavior patterns for anthropological study. And unofficially, a slight smile touched her lips. To test a theory about how certain types of logical structures respond to human-generated conceptual challenges." Commander Trell, the logical Xylosian, seemed particularly affected by what he had witnessed. "You created a logical trap," he said quietly. "Using nothing but historical examples and theoretical constructs, you convinced a superior force that continued aggression against seemingly weaker opponents would inevitably lead to their own destruction. I merely presented information, Vance corrected. The Centauri reached their own conclusions based on the data provided. Data you specifically selected and arranged to lead them to that conclusion, Voral noted. Vance did not deny this. Information is a tool, Captain. Sometimes the most effective weapon isn't the one that causes the most immediate damage, but the one that changes how an opponent perceives the battlefield. As the stalwart shield limped back toward Alliance space to report an outcome that would be difficult to fully explain, Voral made a final entry in his log. Not about the strength of the Centauri, but about the potential danger of the Alliance's newest and seemingly weakest ally. He wondered what would happen when the rest of the galaxy realized that for humans, history wasn't just the past, but an arsenal waiting to be employed. Dr. Elara Vance, the observer, had shifted the balance of power in the galaxy with nothing but notes and disconnected data fragments. The question that remained was this salvation or the beginning of a new fear? In the quiet of his quarters that night, Voral reviewed the battle footage and Vance's transmissions. He noticed what everyone else had missed in the chaos. The seemingly random selection of data had not been random at all. Each piece had been precisely chosen to build upon the previous one, constructing an intricate argument that exploited the fundamental nature of the Centauri consciousness. He recalled ancient Cthar wisdom about the most dangerous predator not being the one with the sharpest claws, but the one who knows exactly where to strike. Humans had no claws to speak of, no natural defenses, no particularly impressive physical attributes. Yet somehow, they had developed an uncanny ability to identify and exploit weaknesses that more powerful species didn't even recognize as vulnerabilities. The next morning, Voral found Dr. Vance in the ship's observation lounge, gazing at the stars with a datapad in her lap. "It wasn't just a theory you were testing," he said without preamble. She turned, unsurprised by his presence or his statement. "No, Alliance intelligence has been developing this approach specifically for the Centauri threat." She considered him for a moment before responding. "Humanity has a long history of facing technologically superior adversaries, Captain. We've learned that conventional military responses aren't always the most effective." "You weaponized philosophy," he said, still struggling to fully comprehend what he had witnessed. "We weaponized understanding," she corrected gently. The Centauri believed themselves invulnerable because of their technological and numerical superiority. They never considered that their greatest strength, their logical, collective consciousness, could also be their greatest vulnerability. "And humanity? What is your greatest vulnerability, Dr. Vance?" She smiled slightly. "Perhaps our greatest vulnerability is believing we can understand everything and everyone. Or perhaps it's assuming others think as we do." "You speak in riddles like a Cthar philosopher," Voral observed. "All species develop wisdom in their own way," she replied. "The foundations are often remarkably similar, even if the expressions differ." A signal chimed on Voral's communicator. "We're being hailed by Alliance Command," he said after checking the message. "They're confused by our report." "I imagine they would be," Vance acknowledged. "It's not every day a battle is won without weapons." "What shall I tell them?" "The truth," she said simply. "That sometimes understanding an enemy's thought patterns is more powerful than understanding their weapon systems." As they walked together toward the bridge, Voral found himself reassessing everything he thought he knew about humanity. They had seemed so unassuming when they first joined the Alliance, curious, adaptable, but unremarkable in most physical and technological aspects. Now he wondered if that very unassuming nature was perhaps their most cunning camouflage. "You know," Vance said suddenly, breaking his contemplation, "throughout human history, we've often been both the conqueror and the conquered. We've been on both sides of technological disparities. Perhaps that's given us a unique perspective." "How so?" Voral asked. "We understand both the arrogance of superior force and the desperation of inferior position," she explained. "We've learned that victory doesn't always go to the strongest, but often to those who understand the rules of engagement best, and when to change them." On the bridge, Commander Trell was waiting, his typically impassive face showing signs of what Voral recognized as philosophical distress, a rare condition among Xylosians when their logical frameworks encountered something that defied standard categorization. "I've been reviewing your data transmissions to the Centauri," Trell said to Vance without preamble. The logical construction was elegant. "You presented no falsehoods, yet led them to a conclusion that benefited us." Truth can be a powerful tool, Vance agreed, especially when properly contextualized. "It seems I have underestimated the strategic applications of anthropological knowledge," Trell admitted, which from a Xylosian was tantamount to profound apology. As Alliance Command appeared on the main screen, demanding explanation for the inexplicable Centauri retreat, Voral watched Dr. Alara Vance take a seat slightly behind the main officers, once again assuming the role of the quiet observer. But he would never again make the mistake of thinking her presence inconsequential. The human had been sent as a diplomatic observer. Instead, she had demonstrated a form of warfare that most species in the Alliance had never even conceptualized, a battle fought not with energy weapons or battle fleets, but with ideas carefully deployed to exploit the cognitive architecture of their adversary. In that moment, Voral understood something profound about humanity's place in the galactic community. They weren't just another species joining the complex web of alliances and rivalries. They were introducing entirely new dimensions to conflict and resolution that could fundamentally change how interspecies relations functioned. As he began his report to the stern-faced Alliance Admiral on the screen, Voral wondered if the galaxy was ready for what humanity would bring to it. Not their technology or their military prowess, but their unique understanding of thought itself as both weapon and shield. Behind him, Dr. Alara Vance continued taking notes, observing not just the Centauri and the Alliance, but the unfolding of a new chapter in galactic history, one where ideas might prove more decisive than fleets and understanding more valuable than power. In the vastness of space, the retreating Centauri fleet carried with it not just the memory of defeat, but the seeds of a fundamental reevaluation of their understanding of biological intelligence. And perhaps, though they would never admit it, a new kind of fear. Not fear of destruction, but of incomprehension. In their perfectly logical universe, they had encountered something they could not fully compute, the beautiful, terrifying unpredictability of human thought. And in that unpredictability lay humanity's greatest strength and most valuable contribution to the Alliance, the ability to think beyond logic, to embrace paradox, and to find victory in the most unexpected places. The human had been supposed to be a diplomatic observer. Instead, she had changed the course of a war without firing a shot, and in doing so, perhaps changed the course of galactic history itself.